Good evening, everybody. We're going to give it just a second because we're still admitting people into the waiting room. We're excited about this program tonight. We had over 200 people to sign up for this program, and so we're just waiting for everybody to come into the room, and we are going to start now. Good evening. My name is Stephanie Williams, and I am the president of the Women's Political Collaborative. On behalf of the board and our members, I welcome you to this evening's program on racism. Then and now, have we changed? We are excited to hear from this esteemed panel that includes Mr. Dwight Lewis, Miss Sabina Mayudine, and Miss Joyce Searcy, all hosted by Larry Woods. Thank you all for being here. And I also want to thank the board members of the Women's Political Collaborative. I see many of you have logged in this evening. I also want to thank Vice Mayor Jim Shulman, who is joining us this evening, and County Clerk Brenda Wynn. Before we get started, I'd like to encourage those of you who are not members of the Women's Political Collaborative to become a member. We're built on the strength of our membership, and our membership allows us to continue to bring you informative programs and events such as the one that we're going to bring to you tonight. And in fact, we've got another program lined up next Wednesday, July the 8th at 12 noon. It's going to be a Lunch and Learn program entitled MNPS, What's the Plan? I think that's on everybody's minds, and we're going to be speaking with Frida Player Peters and Christian Bugs on Wednesday afternoon about that. So that being said, I do encourage you to join the collaborative. Joining is a very simple process. It takes less than 5 minutes, and it can all be done online at WPCTN.com. Moving along, let's get things started for this evening. I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Larry Woods. Larry is an attorney who teaches constitutional law at Tennessee State University and who loves nothing more than a good political fight. His law practice is known for cases involving civil rights. And Larry marched with Dr. Martin Luther King, John Lewis, Julian Bond, and did voter registration in Mississippi in the in the 60s, and did draft counseling to protest of the war. Mr. Woods is passionate about his family, books, coaching, debate, and political strategy, and he's also a graduate of Donaldson High School, Emory University, and Northwestern. So, Larry, I think I can speak for everyone here when I say we're excited about this discussion this evening.
I am too, and I hope a lot of really good people are joining us, and I hope what everybody hears tonight from our three panelists, that you'll go and repeat to the people you work with, live with, get along with, argue with, and get the word out, because, you know, I bet everybody listening tonight, certainly everybody on this panel, has worked hard to combat racism all their lives. And the problem in America of white privilege, primarily white male privilege, hasn't changed a whole lot, at least not in my lifetime. Clearly there's been some progress here and there. Clearly we need more progress, but after having labored in the vineyard of civil rights for most of my life, it's apparent to me every day where I wind up with groups of white people that there are a lot of people out there, mostly white people, who really don't get it, who really don't know what's going on. I mean, white America has lived a lie from the very beginning. Our founding documents, Declaration of Independence. You know, when Thomas Jefferson, we won't get into Sally Hemings, but when Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, you know, those words we all learned in third grade, that these truths are self-evident, that all men are created equal. We all know what they meant. They meant white men who owned property or who owned chattel slavery, that those men were created equal, and that they were endowed with certain fundamental rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So let me introduce you to our panelists, because I think they're going to talk about things that give the lie to those founding documents. First up, Joyce Espy Searcy. I want to emphasize the Espy because her brother Mike Espy is running for office in Mississippi and needs all the help he can get. Miss Searcy, whom I've known all your life, well, close to it, since you were right out of college, I guess. Miss Espy is the founding director of the Office of Community Relations at Belmont University. And even more importantly for our community, for over 20 years, she was president and guiding light of the Bethlehem Centers, which mentored and provided for over 2,000 children and youth every year for the 2 decades she ran it. Ms. Searcy is a graduate of Fisk University and Vanderbilt University. She served on the national boards of the YWCA and the national board of the Girl Scouts. She won the Athena Award, all kinds of honors. Most of you know Joyce Searcy, know how active she's been in our community. Sabina Mohyuddin is a Bangladeshi American Muslim born and raised here in Nashville, graduate of Vanderbilt University. She helped launch the Sons and Daughters of Abraham Project, which brings Muslim, Christian, and Jewish youth across all of Middle Tennessee into a dialogue and outreach program. She was an outspoken critic of the 2011 anti-Sharia bill in the Tennessee legislature. She's a founding member and is now the executive director of the American Muslim Advisory Council. She's currently in the Leadership Nashville class, lives with her family here in Nashville. And Dwight Lewis, I assume everybody knows Mr. Lewis. He's a retired Tennessean newspaper reporter, op-ed page columnist, editorial page editor, born in Knoxville, lived as a child in Strawberry Plains before he came and made his career with the Tennessean. And he didn't put it in his biography for me to recite, but I have to say over the last 40 years, 45 years here in Nashville, every important political and public policy issue that's come before this community, Dwight Lewis has had a voice in working through his work with the Tennessean. So let me start with Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis, tell us what you think the state of race relations is in our great country and what direction you think we're headed in.
Well, Larry, in 1968, March 1st, 1968, the Kerner Commission, which had been appointed by President Johnson the year before to find out why riots had occurred across the country and to keep them from, give suggestions on keeping them from happening again, said that we were a divided nation. At that time, one white, one black. Here we are in 2020. Our makeup has changed some, but we're still a divided nation. And I think, you know, the protests that we're seeing today, the marches, are very good, but I don't know where we're going. I hope the protesters have a focus, have a strategy to get where they want to go. And hopefully to make this nation a better nation. I think we still have some problems. You know, our president, I'm not fond of our president of the United States. I think he's caused a lot of the problems that we're facing today. But I think overall we need to talk more. We're seeing some things done. NASCAR did something great last week. The state of Mississippi is doing something great yesterday and today. But we need more communication between people of different races, backgrounds.
Well, Ms. Mohyuddin, tell us what you think about Dwight's comment on the divided nation in light of this Arkansas group that ran this atrocious, terrible anti-Islamic advertisement in the Tennessean last week. Did you get support? Did you and your community get support about that? Are we divided about that?
Well, I mean, we saw people from across the country, but really in Tennessee, in Nashville area, people were reaching out to us and they were all outraged about this ad, and they were outraged and disappointed that the this ad could even run in the Tennessean. And so what we saw was years of work in the community, in collaborating with different organizations, different people on different things, not just talking about Islam, but collaborating on social justice issues, paying off because people knew our community, people knew and recognized the harm this ad would caused in our community. And they reached out to us, and when we had that sign-on letter that was in this Sunday's paper, we had over 700 people and organizations sign on. And we know if we had reached out to more people would have signed. And so that, you know, makes makes me feel, we've come a long way, our community, especially since 9/11 and, uh, everything that's been going on. And, but we also know that there's a long way to go. There's a long way to go, because it's not just being outraged about an ad. It's having discussions about Islamophobia within your families, and understanding how it permeates our society.
And Ms. Cersei, I know that when Dwight Lewis talks about we need more better communications, I know that that's been a lot of the work Ms. Moyuddin's done with her organizations. I know that's a major focus of the organization you started, or agency you started at Belmont University. Tell us what your experiences have been.
Well, I think that, and I agree with Dwight, that it's, I guess how I could say that I feel right now is I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm very glad that there are the demonstrations and the protests. There's a difference between demonstration and protesting, because protests are about policy. And I am gratified that there are so many white people, especially young white people, out there involved in the protests. But just as Dwight said, it has to lead somewhere. And unless we change policy, nothing happens. Because we're talking about dismantling systemic racism in all kind of areas, educational, correctional, I could go on and on. But all of this has to lead somewhere. And the reason why I say I'm cautiously optimistic is because we're in this technological age where we lose focus. We can't pay attention for a long, long time. And usually it takes so many weeks and then it dies down. So we have to be sure, in all areas, across all lines, stay united and be sure that this does not die down.
So do you think the media portrayal of the marches and the demonstrations of the last month or two, do you think they've presented an accurate picture of what's really going on in the country?
Are you directing that to me?
Yeah, start with you.
Well, it depends on what channel you're watching.
Well, I don't watch that channel.
I know. That has been interesting to me as well, because I always wonder, had it not been for that 16-year-old young woman who took the video, her head was on straight. She was doing the right thing. And it could not be ignored. And just like in the civil rights movement, and I'm so old that we were watching all of that on TV at the time, but that was a new phenomenon for television to be recording the demonstrations. And now we have young people and all people taking out their telephones, recording it. So it's almost though the media cannot ignore it anymore. The question is, what happens with the talking heads? How do they interpret all of this? And I think that the young reporters, especially, I know we're talking about the protests and demonstrations, but people have a tendency to go to people like themselves for information. And I think that reporters have to be sure that they are talking to people in segments of the community with whom this affects. All of the racism that's going on in the country. I was even thinking about the tornado that happened in Nashville. The young reporters on the local television stations went straight to East Nashville first, because those were the people that they knew. They did not go to North Nashville first. So I think that how it is reported is dependent upon the viewpoint and the contacts that people have. And I think the reporters have to expand their contacts so that they are talking directly with members of the Muslim community, the Hispanic community, the Black community, to do a better job.
And I want to chime in there, because that's such an important important thing, because we have to tell our own narratives. And you know, with this ad, one of our discussions with the Tennessean is, first of all, they need better cultural competency training among their editors, staff, and reporters, and to really understand the issue of Islamophobia and racism within, you know, in our communities and how it's affecting our communities. But we're also like, where's your Muslim reporter in your staff? You know, like, how can you accurately tell our stories if you're telling them for us? I mean, you don't have those checks and balances. So, you know, when it's interesting, because when I read something in the paper and media and it covers the Muslim community, I can pick out right away where they left out somebody's voices, they left out a point of view, or they've just left out important facts to understand, you know, the story. But I can pick it out because I'm a Muslim. And so when I read stories about other communities, I often wonder, what am I missing? And so, you know, the media has to do a better job of, you know, better representation among the reporters, but, you know, knowing the different points of view, knowing who in the community can really explain what's going on. And it's just so important that we're telling our own narratives.
Sabina,
Dwight Lewis, you're the
Larry,
newspaper guy.
Joyce, I go back to the Kerner Commission report. One of the things it said in 1968 is it called for more journalists, more people of color working as journalists, and not only to just be a token reporter, but to be in positions of leadership. And it's up to us, it's up to the people. We have to put pressure on different media organizations to get those people in positions. We have to write letters to the editor, go down to the newspaper or to the television station. Say, I want to see somebody who looks like me making decisions out on the stories. Yeah. So that's what we need. But one of the things that I feel strongly about is that it's been good to see such networks as MSNBC, CNN, some of the local affiliates, the four main ones here, having reporters out with the protesters. You know, all over, you look at Seattle, from Seattle, there's Blaine Alexander, I don't know her, in Atlanta. All over the country, Shaq Brewster, I think is his name. There's a fellow named Patterson. All over the country, and that's what you have to do. That's how you get the stories. That's how, Josh, you get the real people who are involved.
But does the newspaper and the media today, Dwight Lewis, you know, compared to what it was 35 years ago when the newspapers were more locally based, locally owned, locally focused, they weren't subsets of the corporate mega national corporation, doesn't that inevitably affect how much coverage they're going to give and how much staff support they're going to give to their reporters?
It does, and I think all of us know that cuts have been made. You don't have as many staffers working for different media organizations now, and that causes a problem. When I remember in 1985, I heard things. It was Tom Winship, who's the outgoing retiring editor of the Boston Globe. He said at a conference, anything that's worthwhile, it's the National Association of Black Journalists Convention in Baltimore, but he told us that anything that's worthwhile should be in a morning newspaper, should make the morning newspaper up until 12 o'clock at night. Now I think some local papers have a deadline 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. If something happens, if the president dies, you won't be able to get it, may not be able to get it in the paper. That's not right. And other important issues or things that take place.
Do you think any of you, do you think the media is going to continue to give the day-to-day coverage that they really have done a good job on for a month or so on the criminal justice system? I mean, we're having government killings of Black men once a week. Yeah, about once a week.
Look at
the media going to stick with this.
The media organizations should look at what's happening in Colorado now.
Aurora, Colorado.
Right. You know, the McLean fellow. The media organizations are out there covering it, and even Nightline programs such as Nightline. So, and we have, as consumers, we have to call and say, we want to see this. We want to know what's going on in Aurora or in Nashville, wherever.
Yeah, I don't see how anybody can watch that video of Mr. McLean, the violin player, walking back home, confronted by a voice out of the dark. Who are you? What are you doing here? And I'm suspicious of you. I don't think anybody can watch what happened in that video without thinking there is something fundamentally wrong with how we have groomed and trained and expect the police to handle situations. We've got to reform policing in America. And I don't think just the media attention will do that. I mean, right here in Nashville, we're going to have a grand opportunity. We're going to, in the next few months, be selecting a new police chief. And one chief by themselves, him or her, can't change the world, but that's going to be a start. Ms. Moyadeen, Joyce Searcy, what are we going to do? Is there going to be citizen input? Your organization going to have any input on who the new police chief's going to be?
I think that we need to raise our voices. You know, people in power do what they do to benefit themselves. Now, that's just a fact. And we have to remind people that they are working for the citizens, you know, of Nashville. And it is upon us. That's why you just can't elect people and then that's the end of it. We have to hold people accountable so that, I don't know, I'm sure the mayor's going to make the selection, but we have to be there to ensure that there's accountability and that we get a person who will be at the top, who will really institute change. And again, it's not just, can't just leave it up to the police department. We elect people in the Metro Council who make policy. So it's not just the mayor. The mayor's on the executive end. The council is on the legislative end. So that means, sure, we're going to vote for president. Oh yeah, we're going to vote for president. But we have to get out there and vote for all of these smaller offices to make sure that there's policy change in the police department and in all other systems.
I mean, we have, you know, we've seen problems with the police department, with our communities, and it's similar problems in the African American communities, and we keep saying, you know, we need more training. We need more training. We keep hitting a brick wall, and so, you know, the calls for reform, you know, you start to get frustrated. Like, are they going to do something and it'll just be window dressing and say, hey, you know, you wanted me to do this and I did it. Now that should placate you. And so, you know, we have a community oversight board that was, you know, overwhelmingly approved by Nashvillians. But every step of the way, they've had a hard time just doing their job. And so now we're finally getting body cameras, but the police has access to the information in those body cameras. So it's you know, again, it's holding them accountable every step of the way and keep pushing. And I think, you know, when we talk about protest or demonstration, you know, making sure the policy changes come about. I mean, I think we can't lose focus. There is a move to defund, you know, at least take some of the funding away from the police. But we have to have a little more power over what's happening. And just the idea of let's reform. I'm always afraid they'll do something, call it reform, and then say, hey, I checked the box and, you know, you should be happy now. And how do we keep holding them accountable?
Let's drill down a little bit on body cameras for police and law enforcement. You know, the transparency issues here, the decision-making issues here are all important, I would submit. I think the reason we've seen so much media publicity about the racist problems over the last month or two is because there's so many videos of what happened. You know, starting with Rodney King, and starting with Apple and whoever created the smartphone that everybody's got a camera, we now have insight into what really happens.
Larry, let
And
me
gonna have
back up a
body
little bit.
cams. Are we all going to get to see those videos?
Well, let's hope so. But let me back up a little bit. And you mentioned Rodney King in Los Angeles. I want to back up to Emmett Till. And
Yes.
those of you who are with us tonight probably heard of Emmett Till's name. He was a 14-year-old boy, youngster who lived in Chicago, Illinois. And his mother put him on a bus in the summer of 1955, sent him to visit some relatives down in near Money, Mississippi. And he and a relative went to a store, and I think young Emmett spoke to a white lady, and her husband took him out, killed him, gouged an eye out, mashed his head, tied a 75-pound gin to his body, and threw him in the Tallahatchie River. His body was discovered 3 days later. But in I was looking at this a little earlier today. It's a column I wrote. His mother, Mamie Till Mobley, came to Nashville in July 1998. And one of the things she said, thank God for the media. Had I been that little voice screaming all by myself, it would have been a case of the tree falling in the forest and nobody would have heard it. And she just talked about what the media did. And so we need media organizations, reporters, editors to go out. I remember the time, Larry, when the Tennessee State Penitentiary was a dump. It's still probably a dump. The new one is. But some of the editors and newspaper editors and executive directors from TV stations went out to take a look. And those are the type of editors and executives that we need to make sure that transparency takes place. You know, I heard on Nightline last night, there was an officer in Aurora, Colorado. His body camera came off, and another officer tried to give it back to him, and he told him, "I don't want that dude. Take that thing away." We need people to report on those type of things.
You know, Larry, everybody has a role to play. I have a family anecdotal story. When Emmett Till was thrown in that river, my family, I'm from Mississippi, and when Emmett Till was in the river, some people from Greenwood, Mississippi, saw the body in the river. And they called my father, who was in Yazoo City, Mississippi. My family had funeral homes across the state of Mississippi. And they said, there's this boy down there in the river. And what should we do? He said, go get him. So they got him out, and they embalmed that body, and they shipped that body to Chicago. When all of the civil rights marches were going on, you know, it's a very dangerous situation. But my family would allow people to meet in the funeral homes. So, you know, the police weren't thinking about going to funeral homes looking for, you know, dissidents meeting back then. So everybody has a role. Wherever you are and whatever you do, you use your role to make sure that we change systems. That you're not just, I don't know if you've read the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. It's not just to say, I'm not racist. We all have to work on being anti-racist and use whatever position that we have to call these things out and to see that the system is dismantled.
Yep.
Yes.
Joyce, you're absolutely right. Everybody needs to read this book. Sarah Lee, my wife, just finished reading it. It's a great book by a great thinker here. Who's also done a couple of other good books on this same subject. It's not enough for the white community. I try to focus on that. Those are somebody I can reach out to and maybe have a little influence with. It's not enough for the white community to have good thoughts and supportive thoughts and, gee, people shouldn't be like some of those police officers and some of those officials. White people have got to do more. They've got to open up and call that council member, call that mayor, call that governor, call that police chief and say, look, we're not going to put up with this. And until the white community does that consistently, we're not going to get the kind of institutional change we want. As you've kept talking about, Joyce Searcy, We've got to deal with the power brokers. It's not enough to demonstrate and march. I'm all for it. I did a lot of it. We've got to do more than that, though. We've got to change the thinking of the power brokers, and the kind of work you do that Mr.
And Larry,
Levine does.
to emphasize what you're saying is so very important for white people to talk to white people. They already know what I'm going to say. They already know what Sabina and Dwight are going to say. But it's very important that white people talk to white people, because those are the people that you know, and those are the people who trust you. So, what can I do? What can I do? Is talk to your own people.
Well, Larry and Joyce.
Voter registration in Mississippi, I knew I could get a pass. I was white. Nobody was going to come lynch me in the middle of the night. I could go back home to Chicago at that time where I was in school and get away from the terror of nighttime and daytime in Mississippi and Emmett Till. Emmett Till's mother was a true hero and a smart lady. She said at that funeral in Chicago, no, when the TV cameras came in, we're not having a closed casket service. You open that casket up. I want the world to see what they did to my child. She was smart. I don't think as a parent I could do that, have the bravery she had. She was so smart to feed the media what they needed there to help energize everybody from Rosa Parks to Martin Luther King to everybody else we know from that period. And we've got to do that here in Nashville, more of it.
Larry and Joyce, Sabina, I just happen to have a copy of that book also.
There you go.
But let me,
We have it too.
Let me just raise this
We need to make sure the Nashville Library's got 30 more copies of that book. Everybody needs to be reading it. And his other book, Stamped from the Beginning, is just as good, maybe better than the anti-racist book.
That's where.
And why, Dwight Lewis, you've got to finish your book.
The library needs funding, so you can't buy books unless you have funding.
Well, that gets us back to the local issues.
Let me ask a question.
We can do something here locally. We've got people that could be police chief, like Joey Bishop, who was a former deputy chief, left to become chief of police of Columbia, now retired. Louise Kelton, who was a deputy chief of police here, who did so well she became our United States Marshal. And of course, Trump booted her out of office when he came in. I mean, we've got some great African Americans with the requisite experience and knowledge that they could be our new police chief. And every one of us needs to be talking to our council member and to Mayor Cooper and to whoever the decision makers are going to be about the police chief. I don't know that Ms. Kelton or Mr. Bishop have any interest whatsoever. I hadn't talked to them about it. I'm just saying there are a lot of great local people who could be that new chief of police. I don't want to spend $50,000 on a national search. We've got a criminal justice department at Tennessee State University. We've got a criminal justice department at Mitsu, at Cumberland College up the road. We've got tons of competent, qualified people to take that job right here in Nashville. And we need to demand someone that that understands modern times and has local knowledge. We need to demand that they get that job.
You all were talking to white people about racism. We have to talk to everybody about racism. I was thinking earlier today, back in the 80s, I went down to up above Decatur, Alabama. My family, right before Memorial Day, my father used to go back to his hometown and they would clean off the grave sites. And then we'd have dinner. The late John Edgerton, who was a fantastic writer here, lived here in Nashville, was working on a food book, a book about food. And I asked John, I said, John, why don't you come and go down to Alabama with me? And we went down and we got there and I bumped into a relative. And she saw me with John and she said, there's Dwight. And he has this white man with him. I don't know why he has this white man. And I just said, I wonder how John feels. I know how I probably would have felt. But we have to talk to everybody about racism, and we have to teach our young people about history, all types of history. The night of the first demonstration protest march here, I guess you've heard that there was a plaque torn off the Metro Courthouse, plaque of the civil rights of the city and some people in the city movement. And we happened to be a young black man who pulled the plaque down, this 23-year-old fellow who had no idea what he was doing, what the plaque meant. So we have to we just all have to get together and talk to one another about life and about why you're important, why I'm important, what I can do for you and what you can do for me, how we make this a better city. You know, I don't understand why Governor Lee has not talked to the protesters up at the state capitol. You know, talk to them. And one of the things I want the protesters to talk to him about is the death penalty. That's one of the things that I'd like to see, Joyce, is let's get rid of the death penalty in Tennessee. I don't understand why he won't talk.
And Dwight, you know, I agree with you. Let's talk to everybody. And a lot of people think that talking to children is too young. Oh, don't talk to the children about that yet. No, we have to talk to our children, because, you know, when children are born, they don't know anything about race. They don't know anything about race. But I was reading, they said by 30 months, children are using race as a basis by which they choose their playmates. And by 5 years of age, a study was done to show that white children prefer to play with white children, but Black children play with anybody. And by kindergarten, children are espousing what their parents do. So we have to be proactive in raising anti-racist children, and very early on, because if they don't get it at your dinner table, they're gonna get it from somewhere else. And they're also going to feel that it's not safe to talk about race at home. You know, the house ought to be the place where parents talk to children and teach them how to be anti-racist very early on.
So I think going back to the history, right? You know, our children go to school, they should be learning history, but, you know, having gone through high school in the 80s, you don't learn anything about the civil rights. You know, you didn't learn. So we don't know the history the way we need to know it. And so, you know, and again, and that's part of the, you know, racist structure, right? You know, it's what histories are being told and what are being left out. And so teaching our children, but learning it for ourselves, and especially for me, you know, being not being African American, I mean, these are experiences that are best told in the first person. And I see, like, when I go as a Muslim woman and go speak to classes about my experiences, and, you know, growing up in Nashville as a Muslim woman, it resonates more with people. They understand it more. And so, you know, that being around people different from you and building those friendships and learning, and you have to really humble yourself and say, I really don't understand your experience. I can't say, well, I get what it is. I don't, I can't. And I have to be humble enough and to listen. That can also be exhausting. If this expectation is for the ones who are marginalized, we have to tell our stories. We have to humanize ourselves all the time. You know, you have to relive your trauma to make other people understand it. That's too much. I mean, like, you know, having books to read, movies to watch, documentaries to watch. I mean, you know, how do we change? You know, we have to work on the school system and the educational system to change this conversation. And Black history cannot be a 1 month squashed in a few lessons on Black history. It has to be an integral part of history that's being told. Now, we spend years and years learning about colonialism, you know, the colonies in early American history, and we barely zip through the civil rights. I mean, that's been my experience.
We barely zip through, you know, all of history. Mm-hmm. From the time when we had slavery until the time of after slavery, and we were supposed to be free, but people had to maintain power somehow, and so they instituted the slave patrols. you know.
Right.
And after people were freed, people were captured and put back into slavery. And the slave patrols led to arresting people so that they could use them for free labor when they were in jail. And, you know, we just started generations of then Black men who were put in jail, you know, who did not have jobs, who were put in jail. Buying houses. Everybody wants to know, well, why do Black people don't have as much income? Well, from slavery until now, we have been unable to pass down wealth to our children and our grandchildren because the land was taken from us. Even if you had that 40 acres and a mule, the land was taken, you know, from us. And even when we bought a home, there was redlining so that we could not buy a home in neighborhoods, you know, with white people. The value of white homes were higher than the value of Black homes. Even when people went to war for the United States and they were to get a home through the GI Bill, there were GI homes built for Black people up off Buchanan. For white people, they were built over in the Bransford Avenue area. They were bigger homes for white people and they had a park. The smaller homes over off Buchanan did not have a park. So the value of those homes was already inequitable. And we have done this time and time again through all of our systems. And then we wonder why. We wonder why there's such inequity. It's been from the time, you know, slaves were brought here.
I've sued a lot of school systems over segregation in Tennessee. I've represented a lot of school boards. And I went to school, public school here in Nashville. My experience is the history Ms. Moyuddin's talking about, what you're just talking about, Joyce Searcy, and Dwight Lewis knows this too, the history doesn't get taught. There's not enough money in the budget, A, to even schedule history classes in many of these schools these days, and B, the textbooks that get written, they give what, 1 page to Reconstruction, probably no mention of the 4,000 lynchings at all, and they don't talk about white male privilege that has oppressed women and Blacks and other minorities from the beginning. I mean, I brought redlining lawsuits in the 1970s. That's not something that just happened back in the bad old days. That's something that still goes on today. You can read the congressional hearings about it. Lynching, Congress has never been able to pass an anti-lynching law. Failed again 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Can't make lynching a crime in Congress. And that tells you just how desperate the state of race relations really is when we're not paying attention. You know.
But what do we have to do, Larry, Sabina, Joyce? What can we do? What can we do to make things better here in Nashville? What can we do to get others involved with us?
We can do exactly what you said at the outset, establish better communications. Talk to my school board member about what kind of history is getting taught. Can I see the textbook that the 4th grade gets that talks about the Civil War and Reconstruction and the Civil Rights Movement, and look and see, does it really address what really happened? I got a lost cause, everybody was happy education 4th grade in Nashville. I had to be in college and afterwards before I really started learning what the real history of Reconstruction was. So better communication, talk to your school board member. And when you finish talking to your school board member, talk to your council member. And when you're finished talking to him or her, go out and join Ms. Moyuddin's organization. Join with Joyce Searcy and some of her community organizations. I mean, her husband, Walter Searcy, and I filed as you know, Dwight, filed the class action lawsuit in federal court to stop the death penalty in this state successfully for almost 30 years. We've got to encourage people to do those kind of things, and we do that with better education, better communications, and as Joyce Searcy keeps saying, Ms. Moyuddin keeps saying, we've got to talk to the people who have the power. We've got to insist that we, everyday people, deserve to be in the room where the decisions are made. I don't necessarily get a vote, but I want the right to speak up and say, hey, wait, you hadn't thought about this, you hadn't thought about that. What about this person? What about that person? the kind of examples Joyce Searcy has been talking about.
You know, Larry,
And you know, that takes,
We talk to our newspaper that you've got to give better coverage of this.
that takes, what we're asking for is for people to make sacrifices. I mean, you know, a phone call is easy, but are you going to sacrifice your seat on a board to let someone else in so we can have a more diverse perspective on issues, that we can actually be responsive to our diverse community needs? Are you willing to sacrifice? That's my question, because, you know, it's easy to make some calls. And the challenge in Nashville, in Tennessee, is anytime we try to do something good on the city level, the state comes and co-ops us. And you know, the last, we saw with the Community Oversight Board, the state coming in and trying to pass and take away some of the strength of our board. And so, but you know, that's a whole nother can of worms, talking about the state legislature.
But
And,
Sabina, that's why we need to encourage people to register to vote and to go vote. Vote out those people who want to come and take over, that you don't agree with.
Larry,
get
you know
our
what I
people
tell
in office.
people all the time is get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Mhm.
It's the little things. If you are in a room, and a lot of people of color are in a room where they're majority white people, microaggressions are happening all the time. Don't leave it up to the person of color to say something. Become uncomfortable and call it out and say why. I am so proud of my neighborhood association. You know, I live in what used to be a predominantly Black neighborhood. Walter and I downsized to this predominantly Black neighborhood, but it got gentrified. And people have cameras all over the place. And the cameras are recording whoever comes to the home. And when people come to the home, people are so suspicious about this person. And then they send that information all over the neighborhood. We had a young man who was mentally ill to come to somebody's house. And the next thing you know, they got circulated all over our neighborhood through our listserv. And so the board of the neighborhood organization passed a policy that you cannot post those anymore, because this man was mentally ill. He was basically asking for money for food, but people assumed that he was there to break into the home. You know, so you've condemned the man already. And we made arrangements for those videos to be sent, you know, to police department, so they'll see if that person, you know, has any record or anything like that. But we have to stop things like that, because those videos are dangerous. You know, they already condemn people before anything has happened. And so it's the little things like that that you see every day that you have to speak out against.
Ms. Moyedine, you're bound to see microaggressions and worse every day. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't.
no, yeah, I see it. I see it. You know, people are surprised. You know, oh, you're so smart, right? And how can you be as a Muslim woman? Or seeing me in position of leadership. I remember. I mean, and this might on the onset might not sound like a microaggression, but people will say, "Oh, you look so pretty," and he's like, "You wouldn't tell a white woman that you didn't know, oh, you look so pretty." It's the idea that since I'm a Muslim woman, I must be oppressed, must be, you know, have a sad life. Let me say something nice to her. So these things are always going on. The assumption that I'm not educated, or I don't have a voice, or when I do speak out, they're taken aback, you know. And so these things you always deal with. You get used to it, you know. And unfortunately, I think we just get used to it. But we dream of a day when nobody notices that. People just see you for who you are and your talents and your abilities. But, you know, again, it's, you know, you have to be in the right spaces. I think being tokenized, I mean, I think that's one of, you know, the scary parts as we move forward and people are like, okay, yeah, we need a Muslim on this board. We want to diversify, and you're not quite sure why have you been put here. You know, are you allowed to speak your voice? Are you allowed to speak freely? And, you know, I went once to the National Association of Independent School People of Color Conference, and almost all attendees were people of color. And it was the first time I went to a conference where people were speaking honestly about all issues. And so when we're in other spaces, we're always holding back. We cannot speak 100% honestly. So I'd like to see that change, where people really understand my issues and where I'm coming from. So when I speak honestly, I don't have to worry about somebody being offended, because that's always, somebody's going to be offended because I said something. And then where's my position? Is this a comfortable space for me? Is this a safe space for me? So when we talk about diversity, you have to talk about inclusion and equity. You can't just be tokenized, because you know, I've seen people say, yeah, we want diversity. We got this woman on the board. I say, yeah, but you don't know how, you haven't built the culture to respect that woman. So, you know, your diversity doesn't mean anything.
Joyce Cersei, what about it?
Well, when she was talking, I was thinking about people who were in positions, even in the social service agencies in Nashville. I know I had a young woman who has a PhD called me, and she said, Joyce, I applied for this position at X agency. I know I'm not going to get it. And I said, why do you say that? She said, because the people who run social service agencies in Nashville are all white women. They don't have, you know, people of color. So we have to begin to put people in positions of power to make changes, who have lived the lives of the people that they're serving in all of these different kind of positions. And way down the line, I mean, we have qualified people. We have to have, I can remember when I had a secure job, but somebody asked me to apply for the CEO of a position, and it was a predominantly white position. I'm pretty sure I was used, you know, because they needed a person of color to apply, so they can say, we did check that box off. And a friend of mine who was on the selection committee said, you know what they said about you after your interview? And I said, what? You think she could talk to the people in Belmead? I mean, that's the kind of microaggression that we're talking about. Simple things like that. I mean, it's just amazing what happens. And I think these boards need training, not just police, we're talking about that, but all of these corporate boards, nonprofit boards, everybody needs to change. This is a time when we need to begin to question everything, because it's proliferation all over our society.
You know, Larry, Sabina, Joyce, tonight shouldn't be the only night that we talk about race and racism in Nashville, you know, or in Tennessee or wherever. We need to get people who don't look like us, invite other people, 1 or 2 or 3 others, to sit down and have lunch or have breakfast or have dinner. Larry, you know, and Joyce's husband used to be a member of the Wednesday night club. Guys would get together and they talk about different issues. People who everybody didn't look like one another. We need we need some groups like that. People to invite one another to dinner or to lunch.
And
everybody, Judge Birch and Bill Barnes, all of them talked and ate. They broke bread together.
Right. And that's the way to do it. A local neighborhood, local town, local city, local actions, make people uncomfortable, put yourself in uncomfortable positions. It's always uncomfortable in the beginning.
And maybe we can invite the governor to talk to him about why we shouldn't have the death penalty in Tennessee.
Let's do it.
Thank you.
Larry, you know what I tell young people? When you feel yourself being uncomfortable, know that I'm about to learn something, because that's your brain. Your brain first signals fear. And as you ride that wave and just get past the fear and do it. Because what's going to happen is you now put yourself in a situation to learn something new.
I want white people who are scared to speak up because they feel like they don't know what they're doing. They feel like they don't know what to say. I want to say to them that people like Joyce Searcy and Dwight Lewis, I pick on those two panelists because I've known them for decades. You know, if you're saying something, doing something, and I think Ms. Moyadeen was talking about these examples, if you're doing it out of a spirit of wanting to do good things and you screw it up, if you'll just stop and think about it and recognize, gee, I didn't say that right. Gee, I shouldn't have said that. Gee, I should have done that differently. If you'll acknowledge the error, if you'll, say, gee, I'm sorry, most people are going to give you a second chance. Most people are going to say, well, let's go have another cup of coffee like Dwight's talking about and talk about this some more. It won't be the end of the world. Yeah, it might be uncomfortable some, but Joyce Searcy, Ms. Moyadeen need to write a book too, emphasizing what you've been saying. But we've got to encourage our neighbors, our friends, our council members to pay attention. And Dwight's right, doing this more often helps. It helps so much.
I always tell people that, because sometimes people will come up to me and say, I have a stupid question, I'm not sure. I'm like, ask me anything. I'd rather be the one answering than you going to the media or on the internet and getting the wrong answer. So ask me anything, because that's an opportunity for us to have a conversation.
I'll testify for Ms. Moyadeen. I wrote her 2 or 3 stupid emails that I was a little bit nervous and uncomfortable writing, like, how do I pronounce your last name? And I felt really stupid having to ask that. I've lived a long life. I ought to know how to pronounce names. But she was very kind and very gracious and very helpful. And we got to know each other through a series of 5 or 6 emails the last couple of days. We've gotten to know each other a little bit. And therefore, next time I talk to her, I'll be more comfortable about expressing what I really think or asking the questions I really need to ask.
And when you get to know somebody, you can understand them better and understand why they want certain things or why they're not just happy about all your happiness.
And and know that we are all different. There's no one Black person who represents all Black people. There's no one Muslim person who represents all Muslim people. We are diverse as well. So you have to get to know all of us.
And the same thing goes for white folks too.
Yes, amen.
Sure. But it's the white folks that need to do some learning here, a lot of learning, more so than
we know a lot about you.
They're the majority. If we can't persuade a lot of white folks, we're going to keep having all these same problems. Well, I said I was going to give people...
2045, we're going to be a majority minority country.
Right.
And if we don't start making these changes, things are just going to get worse, because you're not going to keep our communities down forever. I think we've seen it in activism of our youth, and I think in the Muslim community, for the immigrant Muslim community, they came in kind of putting their heads down, doing what they needed to do. For this next generation that's growing up here, they're sick of it. And that's the attitude, we have to have now. We can't take it anymore.
Even for people who are concerned of power and just concerned about profit, what Sabina is saying is true. And so if you look to 2045, we're going to need trained people of color running companies who know what they're talking about, who know what they're doing in order to be competitive on a world stage. That is what's going to make everybody keep money in everybody's pockets and spread that wealth.
You're right. All 3 of you are right. And I wish we could have 1 million people tuned in listening to this. And that's why it's important. I think our time's up. I didn't give you time to make any closings, but we were talking about the important parts anyway. You know, and again, I would just say to our audience, I hope every one of you tomorrow will talk to people you work with, will talk to your neighbors, will talk to your friends, and repeat a lot of what Ms. Moyadeen, Ms. Cersei, and Mr. Lewis have been saying. All of us, it's important for our children. It's important for our future. I want to thank Joyce McDaniel for organizing and producing this tonight. I want to thank the Nashville Women's Political Collaborative for not only this show tonight, but this whole series of productions they're doing. They're all good for our community. I think in 6 months, Joyce McDaniel, we need to do this again and see if we can really say in 6 months, yeah, things have gotten a little bit better here and there or worse here and there. We need to keep the communications open. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
all.
Larry.
You.